Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video. That's where you ask questions. I occasionally get that question down there. Where do I ask the question? You found it. It's down in the comments. And we pick from those each week. Holly is out here with me. I think you can see her back here. She is coming up on her 16th birthday and she's doing okay. She's doing pretty good right now. So not knock on wood. She's again, it's super hot. I mean, it's been pretty hot summer, as everybody knows. So she's walking once in the morning and then she's pretty much in the house the rest of the day, and she's doing pretty well. This is the last few days of the sale on the weekly garden planner, the $30 off sale. And you use the code July to get $30 off on the weekly garden planner. I have September ready. It just needs to go. I just need to put it up. One thing that I got an email about how to get back to the home page on the weekly garden planner. And then I realized I have not put a kind of a link back on any of the weeks on the entire plan to go back to the main page to pick the next week or whatever. So somehow I overlooked that. On the Learn to Garden video series, if you're watching a video, down at the bottom of that video, it says back to the home or whatever it says. It doesn't matter what it says, but it gets you back to where you can pick the next video to watch. Somehow I overlooked putting that button. So at some point in the next week or so, I'll go back to all those pages and put an easier way for you guys to navigate the weekly garden planner. I'll put that in place. Let's see. I put up 2 more pieces of a tour on the channel this week. And they're in a playlist if you want to. I'll link that playlist down below this video if you want to start from the beginning. It's going to be like 17, 18 videos probably for this entire tour, but we basically talk through every single plant that's in the garden. I've still got a few I haven't shot yet. It's been raining a ton. The rain has been great, but it's almost gotten to the point of beating the garden up a little bit. And you'll probably see that toward the end of those tour videos. But if you haven't started, the first video is a drone video. You can see the layout of the entire space, and then from there we just go from the front to the back garden back here with literally every plant that's in the garden, showing how they performed, all the new things that got added in the last year, that kind of thing. Then there was a video from the Gulf where I just talked about some plants down at Flowerwood Nursery, and then went over to Buddy Lee's and visited him. And then on Monday, we went down to Spartanburg Community College and shot a video with Kevin Paris at Spartanburg Community College about magnolias. And I have 4, that video will be up sometime this week, and I have 4 magnolias that are going to be the first 4 plants at the new garden down in Wallace. So we've got 4 hybrid magnolias that will be kind of very rare magnolias, but super interesting. And we'll talk about those. I'll talk about them in this video this week, but more when we're down in Wallace planting them in the ground later this fall. Okay, let's jump into some questions from this past week. Somebody just said, how big is this property? It's 0.19 acres, so a little less than 2/10 of an acre, and it's chock-a-block full of plants, as you can probably see back in the background here. We've used it. There's still some space, and that's, if you're following along with this these tour videos, there's still some space here now, and there's a few spaces here where annuals are occupying the space for the thing we haven't found yet for that space. So there may be some plant that we run across someday, and then we plant it there, and then we don't put annuals back in that space. Okay, let's see. One of the things a lot of people brought up in the video from down on the Gulf tour was Buddy's native meadow. So Buddy Lee, the inventor of Encore azaleas. I don't have an Encore in the backdrop right this second. Of the repeat flowering azaleas. He has this, I've shot that meadow a couple times now, and it may not be interesting to everyone, but it's super interesting to me. It's just a place he burns, and then you got all these native perennials that come back in that space. There's some blue stem grass, and then within that are all these flowering things that come back. But I'm always interested in a lot of these plant breeders that breed Asian plants, as their profession. Most all of them have a passion for native plants. And so, Buddy absolutely does. And when we visited Bobby Green, who introduces all these camellias that are out here, you know, he's working on Father Gilla. And when we go to Tony's, you know, Tony has probably, I don't know how many non-native plants are in the garden at juniper level, but when you put him on film and say, well, let's talk about whatever you want to talk about, it's always native plants. So, you know, it's kind of funny that a lot of these guys, their passion is absolutely native plants. This rain has been, we definitely have two versions of this summer. We have the May-June version, which was bone dry and just hot as it could be, low humidity, breezy days, which, you know, we don't get a lot of breezy days here, especially in the summer. And now 100% humidity and 92 degrees and rains every day. And so it's definitely two different versions. It's not so uncommon that we shift to lots of thunderstorms later in the summer here. August is our wettest month of the year in total rainfall. So it's not unusual that spring is a little dry here and then it migrates toward thunderstorms. It's just, usually we don't go that long of a window without rain, which, you know, we went, I don't know how many, 90 days probably with a teeny tiny amount of rain over that period of time. Again, with a breeze and with 100-degree temperatures. That combo was not good. And now we got something different going on where I keep forgetting to dump the water out of the rain gauge in the front garden. So I just have no idea how much we've been getting, but you know, it's overflowing out there right now. Let's see. Okay, so somebody had a butterfly bush in a container. It was specifically to butterfly candy, just saying that they weren't impressed because, you know, they had one in a container and it's not doing well. Butterfly bushes are not great candidates for containers. I grew tens of thousands of butterfly bushes over the years, and we had this like sweet spot where, you know, we pruned them in the late winter and then they'd flush out, and sometime around late May, they'd start blooming in the containers. And we had a brief window to sell them before they just looked terrible really quickly. Once they get root bound, they don't do all that well in containers. Now there may be, again, given perfect conditions, maybe there's one here or there that looks okay, but I just overall found them to be poor container plants. Figs are another one. You know, a lot of people want to grow figs in containers, but I have found that was the only plant, one of the only plants in the nursery we had to double up the irrigation heads on by midsummer. We're trying to grow figs, you know, in containers. They just get so root bound so fast. So I think it has as much to do with that. But if you get them in the ground, they're just super, super easy, whatever butterfly bush. But I did not like growing them in containers because it just had, we had such a brief window to sell them before they just, you know, I can grow hollies and boxwoods and other things in containers and keep them for a year and they still look good that whole year. And whenever they sell, they sell. And then there's other plants that are like, we've got about 2-3 week window here where these things are gonna look perfect. And if they don't go, we either have to pot them up into a bigger pot or they have to be dumped pretty quickly. Butterfly bush is definitely on that list. Okay, so somebody just asked in general about planting under a giant oak. I will say that of all the giant shade trees, oaks are probably the easiest thing to garden around, but that does not make them easy to garden around in any way, shape, or form. We have a giant oak as the, you know, kind of dominating. It's off this property, but it definitely still dominates this property back here. I don't have to, I'm only planting under one side of it back there, but it is definitely required us to have a certain amount of stick-to-itiveness watering back there. It's just no, you think you've got something established and then, you know, if it doesn't rain for 90 days or whatever, like I talked about, it can go sideways real quick. So we just have to continue to water back there, but you got to go, I talk about this, a lot about this in the ongoing gardening tour is about some of the plants, trying to get them established in spaces where they kind of don't want to be. That maple that's in the front garden of the neighbor over here dominates our this front corner, this southeast corner of the property over there. And so all of the hosta, the selaginella, ferns, even a camellia that's up there would prefer more slightly moist shade conditions, but it's really dry shade conditions. So my hellebore is performing great out there. Pulmonaria is performing great out there. Bergenia, there's something, cast iron plant. There's some things out there that are performing really, really well. And so that's the thing you're gonna have to identify is really, I got a video on the channel about dry shade that I shot with Mark Wethington over there at the Ralston. But really it's about identifying plants that will take drier shade conditions and using those, and not trying to use any of the, a lot like just avoid ferns, you know, and hostas will get smaller. Heuchera do very poorly in extremely dry shade conditions. So, but there are plants that will adapt better to those conditions. Again, I have a video, you know, for that. And even in the shrub category, you know, a Cuba will adapt to drier shade conditions. Mahonia will adapt to drier shade conditions. Elysium eventually will, but it doesn't at first. The Pieris really struggles in super, super dry shade conditions. So it's just a matter of finding the right plants and then having the stick-to-itiveness to make sure you're watering them for like an extra year probably to get them established in that space. Okay. And then a couple comments along the tour videos about the stories, that people like the stories about the plants, and so do I. That's one of the main things. And I encourage you to share plants with one another and buy plants at botanic gardens and interesting places. And again, and then you'll come up with stories if there's something that a grandparent, had, a parent's had, something from a friend, something from, we just have a lot of plants in this garden that are sentimental in some way. And I think you'll find that the more of those kinds of things you have in your garden, the more just overall joy I think your garden will bring you. If there's just certain things out here that I can look at and go, it reminds me of a place, it reminds me of a trip, it reminds me of something. So I love the stories about plants too, and where they came from. Somebody asked if we have any deer issues here. Have not this year. I saw a couple things that I thought one week maybe we had one come through, but they keep moving through here. If they do come through here, I typically don't have one that can really settle in because we're right in such an urban space here. So the way deer are supposed to operate is they're supposed to come through and keep moving, but nothing moves them now. So everybody just has herds that sit in the same place and eat the same plants every night. But we're lucky, no, we don't have a tremendous deer issue. We have the occasional deer issue. Let's see. Do we have black haw viburnums in our area here? We're on the edge. I think Western North Carolina has black haw viburnums native. So you can find them in the wooded spaces and certainly up in the mountains. And there's a big giant native range from the Gulf way up into the north for black haw viburnums. I got viburnum nudum back here in the backdrop, is one of the native viburnum I have here in the garden. Black haw viburnum is definitely one of my favorite like 3 or 4 season plants. Beautiful foliage when it comes out, great flowers, great for pollinators, great fruit set on that one. Really great fall color. In fact, that's viburnum prunifolium. Prunifolium means foliage like a plum, okay? Or leaves colored like a plum, I guess is what it would translate to. And you see rhododendron prunifolium is plum colored azalea. But you see prunifolium, it means something when you see the Latin name. That epithet means something. And so, but black haw viburnum's a great one. I don't have one in this garden, but they get some size to them. Let's see. Somebody asked about pruning coleus. I take coleus and just chop it in half. There's one in a container right behind this camera right now. And we don't let them bloom during the summertime. They'll try to jump out and start flowering, and they're great for pollinators. And what we'll do is kind of hold off the flowering for a little while. That's a lot in the breeding, where they try to get the flowers later and later and later in the summer, because once they flower, sometimes they won't grow as much anymore. But we're we're pretty brutal on the coleus. We'll just chop them right in half, but you can get in there and get kind of technical with how you're cutting them, but they take the pruning several times a summer if you want to. And then sometime around middle August, we'll stop pruning them and allow them to flower, and we'll do that with several things. That's the kind of stuff we put in the weekly garden planner, is stop pruning some things at a certain time, and that way you can get flowers on them late for the pollinators. And that was, somebody said the weekly garden planner is super helpful, and they follow it week by week. Let's see. There were lots of comments about the Lego art from last week. That just kind of blew my mind, how great that actually was. And then somebody said they had learned from me that the garden doesn't have to be perfect, and I thank you. That's one of the main things I would like to get people to get out of this, and the tour video where I'm showing, leaves that clearly have some sort, we have issues this year, where that heat and the dry weather either cause some burns in the leaves or some interesting nutrient issues, nutrient deficiency issues, showing up in things. I'm not gonna get paranoid about, it was 100 degrees. There's a reason the plants are gonna have weird things going on. I've got a few more maybe chewing insects than I normally would, because there's a lot of stress on these plants. But overall, very few problems, and I'm not, there's a delicate balance between something looking kind of natural, but still being clean enough to not cause you additional problems. So we are careful to make sure the garden is kind of clean and tidy, but also kind of wild looking at the same time. There's a delicate balance in there, but I'm definitely not somebody who needs the garden to look absolutely perfect. I like it kind of a natural look to it. And I don't mind the insects. The weeds are problematic. I don't like the weeds because the weeds create seed, which creates more weeds. And so I am more diligent about weeds than I ever would be about any kind of insect problem. And then another person had said they had started their garden for humans, and it evolved to something else from watching the channel. That's another thing I would love for people to get out of it, is that, we do go shopping for things that are flowery and, floriferous, and a lot of those super flowery things have been made by people to be more and more flowery, but less and less pollinator friendly over time. And so once you, I think once you really hone in on the fact that other things are enjoying your garden, and that becomes the joy of your garden, the more you'll go down the road of picking things that are, for things other than yourself. That's the point there. But so many of the things that are in this garden are not the most flowery thing, but they have the most bees on them. Okay, let's see. So somebody said they thought overwatering shows up as yellow interior leaves, and underwatering shows up in the new growth. It's kind of opposite of that. Most of the time, when you underwater something, it gets super, super dry. The first defense the plant has is to try to shed some of the interior foliage to rebalance the plant. It doesn't want to shed the new growth, because the new growth is where it's going to produce flowers. And ultimately, every plant back here is trying to produce more of itself. Whether it can or can't in our area is another question, but it is trying to flower and get pollinated and make seed, right? So that's the end goal for these plants. And so their first defense is going to be drop interior foliage. You'll see it in conifers in the fall. You'll get the thinning of your conifers in the middle in the fall, because again, their first defense is shed the leaves that don't matter, to our propagating ourselves. And so typically underwatering is interior and overwatering is on the new growth. And the reason that the overwatering shows up on the new growth is because the roots, when they get too wet, whether they're diseased or not, have a hard time functioning properly to get the nutrients up to the top of the leaf that leaf needs at any given moment, to do what it's doing, what it needs, whatever it needs, whether it's calcium or magnesium or iron or whatever the heck that leaf needs at that moment, it needs it. If the roots are in some sort of stress, from hopefully not root rot, but certainly you know, just overwatering, that's when you're going to see chlorosis and other weird things happening in the leaves. Of course, those things can be related to your soil pH and that kind of thing. But outside of that, if everything was functioning normally, and then all of a sudden it rained for 2 months a lot, or the plant stayed underwater for some period of time, and then you started seeing that in the new growth, that would tell you that you know, it's an overwatering issue. But typically, overwatering shows up in the new growth, underwatering in the middle. There's exceptions to everything. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked if we plan on putting some sort of water feature back in here. We had the fountain here that we got from Henry Studio, and I haven't decided where we're going to end up, where it's going to end up. I'm thinking about putting in some sort of seating wall here, and having some sort of fountain that runs behind it all the time, or right here, basically building a seat wall across here, maybe in 2 spots along here, and leaving the middle open. I don't know, but there'll be some sort of water noise behind that wall. It's been in the back of my mind since we started this, that when this became a patio, that I would have some sort of seating wall as part of it, and some sort of water noise attached to that. Okay, so somebody said they didn't look like you could put the bronze torch tomatoes in a sandwich. No, but just pop them in your mouth and keep eating them. There were a few comments about it. You know, I said that bronze torches, I think, is by far and away the best tomato I've ever had. But it's not a slicer, but it's also not a cherry tomato. It's somewhere in between. But it has the best texture, flavor of any tomato I've ever eaten. And everybody that has them goes, oh my God, they're like candy. It's kind of wild how good they are. Let's see. I was talking about plants for bees last week, and I just expanded on the fact that not to try to find 2 or 3 plants that are good for bees, but try to find something that has the bees in the garden the whole season. And somebody pointed out Pieris japonica is good for the bees, and I just talked about Pieris a minute ago. But for us, it blooms in like February and March, super, super early. So it is good. It's a good one to have in your trying to have something flowering as long as possible, because that's the best way to have the bees come back every day, is to have the garden unfolding with new flowers all season long. I'm going to put holly inside. Here's the coleus back here in this container, which is trying to eat the container. I can just cut it in half anytime, or I can just simply pluck the flowers out of the top of it while it's trying to flower, and prevent it from flowering for a little while, and then whatever you want to do. Coleus are pretty tough plants. Let's see, where were we? Okay, somebody pointed out that some of the newer cone flowers seem to draw less pollinators than just like the straight species or older varieties of cone flowers. And that's true. Some of the double flowering ones are definitely less likely to have pollinators approach them. We've seen this in, you know, hydrangea paniculatas. I've got one over here that's closer to the straight species that is covered in bees all day long, but my other hydrangea paniculatas aren't necessarily. Hydrangea arborescens, which is one of our great native hydrangeas. Some of the newer ones are just, there's no place for bees really to even access it. They've been bred to be more flowery for humans and less, not as good for the pollinators. So we've seen that in arborescens, and there's a lot of plants like that. Dahlias, you know, all the big, giant, beautiful dahlias are, you know, award-winning dahlias, you know, have very few bees, or the bees have a hard time getting into the center of the flower. You can see them trying, but with little success. The seedling dahlias over there, which somebody had said were the best pollinator plant in their garden. I agree, they're right at the top of the list. And they said the bees sleep on those flowers at night in our seedling dahlia area over there. But it's not necessarily true across the board that the named varieties and cultivars, you know, the selections are not as good for the pollinators. Because if we were just to think about this, so the difference between a variety and a cultivar is I made a cross with the intent of finding an improvement in these flowers. Like I take this one that has really flowery, and I take this one that has good form, and I intentionally cross them. That cross would be considered a cultivar, like a human was involved and was trying. And whereas like a variety would be well, I was driving down the road and this one coneflower was just better than all the rest, you know, and it wasn't really done with intent. It was just a fluke seedling somehow. And then you take seed from that. So that's the difference between those two things. First of all, this person called the new plants bioengineered, and they're not really like GMOs. They're just basically humans doing what humans have always done. We took corn, which was a plant that was this tall, and turned it into a 6-foot tall plant. And we took tomatoes and peppers and potatoes. Those are all the New World vegetables, you know, that the folks that were in the Americas, you know, the Native Americans that were here first were working on long before Europeans got here. And we were doing the same thing in Europe, you know, all the brassicas, kale, broccoli, cabbage, all of these things came from the same exact plant. This was just generation over generation over generation. Humans can select for things to improve the plants for us, you know, over time. And so that's more what you're looking at here. You're not really looking at, you know, GMOs necessarily, where people are changing the genes in the plants. They're just looking at them and selecting for things that will be more beneficial in the future. This is going to be a very long-winded answer. I can already tell. So yes, so a lot of the new named cultivars or varieties are maybe not as good for the bees, but in some cases, if all I was looking for in the plant was, hey, how can I get more flowers on it, and I'm not really changing anything else about it, that would actually be beneficial for the native pollinators, right? For me to have more flowers on it, if that's the only thing I was selecting for. So what I'm trying to make, my point here is you're not necessarily, some things you're going to make them worse for the pollinators, and some things you're actually potentially going to make them better. And so we're actually visiting the Mount Cuba Center in a few weeks, and I'm so excited for it. I'm actually going with a group, several other nurserymen that are good friends. It should be fun, but Sam, you know, the Mount Cuba Center studies the straight species of native plants versus all the named cultivars, and then they do counts of pollinator visits and other things, other parts of the plant, you know, the other performance pieces that you would look for in an ornamental plant, and then put out a report on, you know how these cultivars match up, named cultivars, varieties match up against just the straight species for being beneficial to pollinators. Easy for me to say, I guess. But so I'm looking forward to that. And so again, if you'll go on the Mount Cuba list and you look at the hydrangea arborescens, there are actually a bunch of named varieties that are right there as good or even better than the straight species of hydrangea arborescens on that list. But then you'll see that bottom of that list is a very specific group of named cultivars that are very floriferous and widely available on the market, but not very good for the pollinators at all. So you can refer to their list if you're looking for this. But it is an interesting thing that as we try to make something more flowery or whatever, it can have a negative impact or not. We could do both, right? We can look for plants that bloom better, hold up better in our gardens, are more adaptive to crazy dry periods and then crazy wet periods and hot periods and cold periods and all those kinds of things, but making sure at the exact same time that we're not damaging that plant for the other native things in our communities to use. Interesting. But I'm so looking forward to having content from the Mount Cuba Center, and that'll be soon. What do I think about clover, the clover lawn trend? I think I love the red clover that people are planting in some of the hell strips around here. It's so great for pollinators. But I think clover in the lawns is great mixed in. But I just always think that if you're going for a monoculture of anything, it's not my thing. So any kind of monoculture is not going to be my thing. All Bermuda, all zoysia, all fescue, all clover, all anything is probably not going to. It's not going to excite me very much, but certainly clover within your lawn, having multiple species of things making up your lawn area is probably beneficial to everything around it. Let's see. Somebody has burnt out snapdragons. They did their snapdragons last October. They made it through the winter. They did fantastic, and now they're just kind of burnt out. Can they prune them and have them come back? Yeah, in all likelihood at this point. We have a couple out here in the front garden that have snuck through the whole year too, that you likely can just prune them and have them come right back. And what choice do you have anyway? They're not gonna look better, you know, going into fall without doing some sort of pruning on them. So give it a shot. Hopefully that'll work out. Somebody said they had gotten their color blends catalog the other day and we're ordering some things. We are too. We're ordering some bulbs. And some of those bulbs will go into the new project down in Wallace. Somebody asked if bee balm is invasive as mint. Well, bee balm is in the mint family, and most species of Monarda or bee balm come back bigger than they were when they went to sleep, but nothing in the mint family is more aggressive than mint. So yeah, I don't think it's there's not comparable really, because the bee balm goes to sleep and then comes back bigger, and then you can once during the season cut it back to where you want it, and that's pretty much all the maintenance you'd have to do on it in a year, whereas the mint would be like constant. You know, you would be constantly putting it back because it's always growing. So there's a big difference between them, but they're both in the same plant family. And you can, if you go over to your Monarda, notice the stems are square. So I've got a mint in a container here. Let's see. So this is mint that's in a container, and you'll notice on the mint that it has square stems. And then if I come over here, easy for me to say. And then this is the Monarda here, and you won't be able to tell, but maybe you'll be able to tell from how I'm spinning it in my fingers here, that it's square as well. But a lot of the things in that mint family have square stems, but the Monarda is definitely nowhere near. The mint's in a container for a reason over here. It smells good. Let's see. Somebody asked if I put more drainage holes in containers when I'm planting them. No, if they have a drainage hole in them, I'm fine with the one drainage hole, but I will say that we try to elevate our containers and make sure that, you know, that the hole stays open, because things can, if you have them in contact with the ground, a lot of times your roots from your plants will just go down through that hole and then ultimately stop the water from flowing out of it very well. So I don't get a special bit and, you know, start drilling new holes in them, but we put some sort of feet on the bottom of your pots to keep it raised up. So make sure the one hole continues to function properly. Do I have a fear with all these new plants that old varieties are disappearing? Yes. And you notice if you go to Juniper Level Botanic Garden, that a lot of what Tony does at Juniper Level is collecting, he's collecting old azaleas. He's collecting, he's got a giant deciduous azalea collection. He's got a lot of plants in that collection that are clearly there to keep them because they're not in production anymore, and that is a problem because we have a lot. You know, what it's like I was talking about. Native Americans took corn and turned it from a little grassy plant, you know, into this big giant tall thing. What if we had some of those genetics that were in the middle, you know, as this was happening? Could we make a better corn plant if we could back up to some of those genetics? So there's that. Anytime you're losing the genetics along the way, you know, it's a potential split in the path that's taken away from you, you know, in the plant breeding. So yes, definitely, as these new plants are arriving to market, we're going to potentially lose some varieties that have the potential to make improvements to other varieties, using them as crosses and that kind of thing, even if they're not the best. But they also may just be better for pollinators as well, like I just said. Somebody said that they may be using their bypass pruners not upside down. I'm left-handed, and so I'm using a pair of right-handed pruners. And so if you think I'm using them upside down or differently than you, or that you're doing it wrong in some way, you're not. I just don't have a pair of pruners that's specifically for a left-handed person. So that's what you were seeing if you were seeing my wrong-handedness in a video. So somebody has a Paul's Gold Chamaecyparis and wanted to know if it can go in the full sun. It can, but I've talked about a lot of times with a lot of these conifers, they don't necessarily want to go in the full sun and then have 4 feet of space around them with black mulch or dark mulch. You know, it's going to burn the roots on them and potentially make it look like that plant is not as sun tolerant as it is. It's just not natural for a plant to grow like that. Hold on, let me spin this around slowly. Okay, let's see, does that get, okay, let's go back to there. Okay, all right, my Paul's Gold Chamaecyparis is in this container, and in about 30 minutes it'll be in the sun. It'll be in the sun the rest of the day, but it's got wire vine planted in the container around it, and it's not going to cook. The roots aren't going to cook on it. So it's not, sometimes it's not necessarily about whether the plant is sun tolerant. It's about, or the top of the plant, it's about whether the roots are sun tolerant. And we plant plants so far apart and then wonder why they're struggling and go, oh, this thing won't take my sun. It takes everybody else's sun, but it doesn't take my sun. But that's just the reason that we plant things here, and then we plant annuals in and around them while they get established for a little while. And then as they fill in, they're able to either shade their own roots or shade the roots of a neighboring plant, and they're helping each other out a bit. So again, a lot of times I get, feedback. It's like, that thing won't take full sun. If you put something, again, 4 or 5 feet apart, in the full sun, the root, and it's a shallow rooted thing, those roots are just absolutely cooking every afternoon, and it's just an unnatural state. Outside of the desert, where plants have evolved ways to cope with this type of thing, with water loss during the day, and they're hairy things that have evolved to be spaced out. In a desert, plants have to be spaced out because there's limited resources, right, for the individual plants. And so each of them had to evolve to be able to tolerate this. But the vast majority of the plants we use in ornamental landscaping in the East are not plants that evolved that way. They evolved in high density competition. And so when you space them out 4 and 5 feet apart and then put dark mulch around them, and a lot of them are super shallow rooted, it's gonna stunt them. And take away from some of their ability to be sun tolerant. Okay, let's see. The mosquito spraying companies, is it possible that they're only killing mosquitoes? So I think some of them are spraying like some sort of deterrent, like a DEET type of product, trying to chase them off the property. But if they're actually spraying something that kills mosquitoes, they're certainly damaging other things. And we also have to think about, as annoying as mosquitoes are, they are the base for food, part of the food chain too. So, it's like, damaging the krill in the ocean, or algae in the ocean or whatever. If you're damaging the kind of lowest things on the food chain, you're damaging the entire food chain. So, even if, so we have a lot of those signs around the neighborhood, where people are getting the spraying done. And again, if somebody's telling you they're killing mosquitoes and killing nothing else, that's highly unlikely that could possibly be true. But maybe they're spraying some sort of deterrent hoping to chase them out of your garden in some way. And I'm sure the rain would quickly wash that away if that's the case. But again, I don't know what those guys are spraying. I don't know the companies that do it here in this neighborhood, what they're spraying. I did read I went down a wormhole on Reddit one time about this, and somebody said that a company had accidentally sprayed their garden. They had an $85 bill in the mailbox from a company that sprayed their garden. They'd got the house number correct, but the street wrong, and had sprayed their garden. If that happened here, it'll be a long day for that company. It'll be a really long day, but all their pollinators were dead. All their bees and everything that were in their garden were dead, and the company had just sprayed it by accident. I don't know if they sued them, or I don't have any idea what happened beyond that, but I did read that story like, oh my gosh, I would just imagine collecting all these all these bumblebees that I have out here and giving them a safe space and a home, and then hiring a company to come and kill them all. one afternoon. That would be crazy. Let's see. So somebody said they had a silly question, and I always write that down when somebody says that, because it's not a silly, there are no silly questions. Everybody has to learn as we go. And I just don't think there are any. Ask away. If you think you have a silly question or something, or you think it's going to embarrass yourself in some way or another, ask it. Don't worry about it. I guarantee you there's 100 other people that have the same question. They just haven't asked it. And I always get that when I'm doing question and answer at my any live talk I give. I got to get one person to ask a question, and then I'll get a second person to ask a question, and then all hands are up. Once everybody's comfortable with it, right? You got to be, but just ask. There are no silly questions. They ask if their soil is going to raise up if they're mulching year over year over year. Yes, but not as much as you think. Most of the mulch breaks down into very, very, minuscule. You can take a handful of this mulch, and by the time it composts down to virtually nothing. You're going to lose some to erosion and wind and other events, and it just barely raises it. If anything, the vast majority of your soil raising is going to come from earthworms and other life that's in the soil, actually kind of refluffing the soil over time, because the construction that was done on your house was so damaging to the soil. But all these plants are rooting in, they're putting biomass deep down into the ground every year, and there's earthworms down there and all kinds of things happening down there. So if my soil's raising, it's less about mulch and more about just air air and organic material that's way down there deep in the soil. But I was in my old house 23 years. I don't think the mulch raised up on the foundation this much in 23 years. Just not negligible. So there you go. That was the end. I don't know how many questions I had actually. I wrote down the questions this week. Steph's been out of town. And I could actually read my own handwriting for once, so that was good. It's probably like 25, 26, something like that. So again, this is the last weekend of the sale for the weekly garden planner. It goes through the 31st, and thank you to those of you who have purchased it. And September will be up during this next week. And again, I'll get some sort of back to home button on all those pages to make it more navigable for everybody who has purchased the weekly garden planner. Thanks for watching.